We never let you rest here. There's a lot of time to rest. Well, maybe. If you're tired, suck it up. We worked on this by telephone and Zoom for I don't know how long ago. And Michelle's not here. I want to especially thank Michelle. Found your story through the press and online. Anyway, it's a thrill to have our two Florida colleagues here to do this breakout. Michael Butler is the Kenan Distinguished Professor in American History at Flagler College, which is in St. Augustine. He did a PhD at Ole Miss under Charles Reagan Wilson, Ted Ownby, and a bunch of terrific Southern historians. In fact, if they had one great Southern historian at Oxford, they'd have one more than we currently have at Yale. Problem here. You into that. Any rate, but Michael is going to tell his story that came out of working with groups of teachers in the Orlando area. And our other guest is Kacie Nadeau, who's a 5th grade teacher of the gifted in language and arts and social studies from Sarasota County, Florida. You two have collaborated before. So I'll turn it over to both of you, and it's Kacie first.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having us. This has been a bit surreal, I would say. Michael and I did not know each other. We've known each other a year, but physically just met in the lobby at the New Haven Hotel on Thursday. So this has been unraveling as we speak. And so having the invitation to be here to share our story is again surreal. So thank you for being educators. Thank you for being advocates for what we are so passionate about. But I'm just going to start with a personal anecdote, and then we'll kind of fill in the gaps. So I've always known I was going to be a teacher. As an only child and a latchkey kid in the early 80s in New Jersey, school was where I socialized, most times connecting more with my teachers than my classmates. At home after school, I would set up a classroom with my favorite stuffed animals and one that wasn't quite teacher's pet, who had a special corner next to my teacher's desk. I enjoyed writing on my chalkboard, grading papers with stickers, and often putting a stuffy in timeout. School wasn't just a place, it was a concept and a safety net for me. My favorite subject was always history, and I relished school field trips to museums and historical landmarks, asking my parents when they could take me back. I always felt the need to connect with a time and a place, imagining how living in the past would be like. As I got older, I flirted with a degree in science, specifically space science, until I realized I could not overcome my frustration that most of the answers to my questions did not yet exist. Although nuanced, history is more finite, and this passion for authentic learning of the past remains with me to this day. So I earned my degrees in elementary and gifted education. I took attendance on paper. I decorated bulletin boards with great pleasure. I sent home notes, not emails, with students and delivered quarterly report cards in envelopes requiring actual parent signatures. Imagine that. It was a pretty good life. Finally got married. I dragged my husband to historical destinations as his personal tour guide and attended as many social studies and history conferences I could afford on my teacher's salary. It became a better life. My scholarly interests continued to grow, and I decided to pursue my PhD in history and curriculum. I mean, let's be honest, what could be more interesting than blending curriculum and history? Nothing at all. To this day, my husband still has not read my dissertation and claims he does not understand half of what comes out of my mouth. Life was busy. It was really interesting. Then 7 years ago, I became an orphan and a mother. While wholeheartedly affected my presence in the classroom, I became more vulnerable, more humble, and more human. Life got really tough. Some days were nearly impossible to face my students with the behind the scenes circumstances, But the bond of trust, faith, and desirable success was so strong. Kids are really incredible. They want you, all of you, on your great, your good, and less than polished days. That is why I teach. I've been an elementary classroom teacher for 20 years. I teach authentic and engaging social studies using primary and secondary sources to my elementary students every single day. In a state, like most states, that only requires mandatory instructional minutes for reading, math, and physical education. For years, I have developed and implemented curriculum, mentored my colleagues, provided professional development for pre-service and veteran teachers. I have given back to the profession that has given back so much to me. So several years ago, when my principal was alerted to concerns over racial materials I sent to our district printing office for use in my classroom, I wanted to know what district employee was vetting my work without context. She quickly dismissed the concerns, but informed me that a computer algorithm scans text for buzzwords related to race. The documents in question were newspaper articles and photographs from the Birmingham Post-Herald of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church of 1963. My instruction is age and development appropriate. It involves the whole of the human story, especially those narratives and voices of struggle stripped away through injustice. Of course, said topics are tough to teach, but are mandated, permitted, and protected through state statutes and standards. For example, the civil rights movement, including the history of the civil rights movement to the present, the history of the Holocaust, the history of African Americans, including the history of African people before the political conflicts that led to the development of slavery, the passage to America, the enslavement experience, abolition, and the history and contributions of African Americans to society are all present in our state statutes. You bet I use primary sources to contextualize this difficult past. How else should you teach this? Is this indoctrination? According to the recent social media posts, teachers are suspect of this. As noted by Dr. Ortiz yesterday, the 1619 project is banned in our state. We have revised civics and government standards with training that occurred last summer, with concerns over the legitimacy and the intentions. My students relish the opportunities to become empathic and connect with not just the facts, but the voices of humanity of the past. Critical race theory was a subsection of a course I took in graduate school. It was the only course I had to take in the College of Social Sciences. This is far from anything I've ever seen in my classroom, in my district, or from any K-12 colleague that I know. So please show me where this is happening. So classroom life is really mystifying at the moment. It's keeping us on our toes, and we are reminded to keep fighting the good fight. But when Florida House Bill 1467 inundated our district mailboxes in August, it was like a gut punch like no other. Legislation now requires that classroom libraries must be vetted by certified media specialists in education, a position that we eliminated years ago. All book purchases, donations are frozen until the Florida Department of Education provides more guidance. I'm really trying to reconcile this political rhetoric, but as we noted over the course of the last 2 days, it's defeating. Do I still have my original classroom library? You bet. Do I still teach the civil rights movement? You bet. Do I use primary sources that promote poignant and candid questions of the struggles of people of the past, engaging my students in historical empathy? 1000%. Yes, we are public servants in a highly rewarding yet messy field. Will we ever be trusted as a truly dedicated professionals we have always been and will continue to be? I have faith. Dr. Butler refreshingly reminds you that education is a cycle and it will return to a fidelity and best practice. We vent on occasion, which I thank him, by the way. So I became a teacher to share in the conversation and progress of knowledge, because for me, nothing is more important. I will remain in this field to bear witness that civilized dialogue is not only necessary, but it is achievable. It just simply has to be done. Our presence here recognizes this is a possibility. So I thank you for having us here today, Dr. Butler.
It's a tough act to follow. I'm not quite that articulate, and I have not prepared many formal written statements. But what I will do for our friends in Zoom land, make sure that she is not burdened with being considered or mistaken for me. As Dr. Ortiz said yesterday when we had a picture taken, I hope this isn't guilt by association, Mike. Too late, Paul. Your blurb's on the back of my book. So a couple of things as we get started. First and foremost, I think that the biggest compliment that I could give for a conference, its organizer, its host, is that I have left every single panel wanting to continue the dialogue. That's rare in academia. The second thing that I think has made this conference stand out for me is I was so engrossed in conversation with old friends and new last night that I left my blazer somewhere. So yeah, maybe it was the restaurant, maybe it's the margarita, maybe it was the Lyft ride that we had, and that's another panel for another day.
What size you were?
I'm not revealing that publicly, Dr. Butler. So, please bear with me because I have been revising this talk all the way up to the last sentence, really. And I'm thinking a lot about my historical methods class this semester, right? It's the fundamentals of what separates the scholar from the buff, the amateur from the pro, the gatekeeper course at Flagler College for the history major. And there are a couple of things that I stress in that class, and that's number one, historians are at their essence storytellers. We tell stories. The second thing that I stress is that what does separate the scholar from the hobbyist is context. Sometimes as scholars, the questions we ask are more important than the answers that we find. So with that in mind, I'm going to start my presentation and my discussion with a few questions. First, my fellow academics, what are you doing to share your expertise with the general public, especially our teachers? There's no wrong answer. Well, maybe. There's no right answer for sure. But the question is, what are you doing to share your expertise with people who need to hear it the most? Especially our teachers. We all have a role to play, right? Talking to Kevin before this panel began. We all can't be the quarterback. That's not a team. We need people doing the policy. We need people doing the instruction. We need people at the liberal arts college, at the state college, at the community college, at Yale University. We need us, everyone. We're needed. What are you doing to share your expertise with the people who most need to hear it, particularly our students, more on our teachers, more on that in a minute. Two, how do you convey that message? Context, credibility of the speaker, and most importantly, okay, Trevian, what's the answer to your so what question? So what? Is this an exercise in academic dialogue that matters in the ivory towers only? Or is it something that matters at the ground level? Third thing for my fellow academics, and I've lived this, what is your plan for when you encounter resistance? What is your plan? For those of us who teach hard historical truths, for those of us who promote the African-American struggle as the very essence of the American story, and coming from somebody who looks and sounds like me, that lands differently with some of the students that I teach, okay? What is the game plan for when we encounter resistance? And to quote Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. The story that I'm going to tell was my punch in the mouth. To our teachers, I have questions as well, because I don't want to forget about y'all. For those of you who are teaching in contested spaces, sounded good, Dr. McLean, didn't it? Contested spaces, right? How can we help you? How can the academy help you do your jobs more efficiently? For those of you who don't teach in contested spaces, what can you do? What can you do to assist colleagues in places that don't have your freedoms? This is a great question I was having last night. We were discussing this last night. What are some things that we can do in places where you have the ability to visit plantation sites, where you have the ability to do archival research at places like Georgetown, where you have the freedom to talk about safe spaces, a phrase that we cannot even use in public systems in Florida? What can you do to help those who don't have the freedoms and privileges you possess? The panel yesterday was great. And as I listened to all those great projects, the entire time I'm thinking, couldn't be done in Florida, couldn't be done in Florida, couldn't be done in Florida. So as I was preparing my remarks and reviewing them with colleagues, first I had to convince my colleagues that I actually got an invitation from Yale. Okay.
They'll let anybody in there.
They'll let, no. Come on, Dr. Bly. No, I'm trying to build my prestige on my campus. My former department chair says that self-awareness is my hero trait, right? But one of the things that was pointed out, and I think it's true, and this goes back to what are you doing? What am I doing as an academic to help those understand, teach, and appreciate these hard histories? It was pointed out to me by a colleague and a friend, hey, Brian Paradis, that your entire career has prepared you for this moment. And I asked, what does that mean? Started in the junior college system, both as a student and as a professor. I had no idea why the civil rights movement was important, and I grew up in LA, Lower Alabama. I did not want my students, as I matriculated through graduate school and had the ability, as Dr. Blight said, to work under some tremendous scholars and even better people. For me, I was encouraged to take a job, Mike. You got to be employed. And it was a community college. And you know what? Teaching a 5-5 load will force you to learn how to teach. Then, when I went to Flagler as a civil rights historian, because St. Augustine has its own civil rights history, it was a 4-4. One of the things I was encouraged to do was be the face of this discipline in the community. So I did. Whether it is reaching out to libraries, whether it is participating in seminars, getting involved, offering my services, driving 300 miles, hopefully for gas money, to speak to 3 people about Jim Crow in Florida, and treating it as if I had a room full of people, right? All of that engagement and the ability, the privilege, the honor, and I don't say that without understanding that it is those things. The ability to share my passion and my understanding and my knowledge about this rich history that makes us who we are to people who may have never heard it is what prepared me for January 2022. So one of the great honors that I've had is being able to work with great organizations like NEH, like the Florida Humanities Council, like the National Council of History Education, the NCHE. And one of the things that NCHE had done in the state of Florida was develop a teachers seminar on a variety of topics, okay? For those who, K through 8, by the way, who represented, worked in underserviced districts, Title I schools, okay? I was contacted and asked to be the lead scholar. Cool. Kacie was contacted. I don't know how to teach her as a parts to a third grader. She is the content specialist, right? I'm the sage on the stage with my PowerPoint and my tie. She's the person who brings the primary sources in to say, this is how you can do it, okay? So the plan was, right? You develop the program and you have 3 blocks of time. Go. This is November 2021. Kacie and I both agreed. We started working together. We had a couple of Zoom sessions where we planned this out. And with a great deal of debt expressed to Jacqueline Hall, I titled the teacher training service, The Long Civil Rights Movement. It's simple. It's simple. What I want to convey to teachers is that the civil rights movement did not start in 1960 and end in 1968. That when we think about the civil rights movement, we have to think about literally freedom as a constant struggle that stretches back into the 19th century. We could go back to 1619 and the first African setting foot on American soil, but practicality, Mike, you've got an hour for that session. So first session, I titled The Long Movement. I started with Plessy, went all the way through World War II, stopped in 55, Little Rock. The trajectory, the connecting points, right? The second session was titled The Master Narrative. The master narrative is what I call the greatest hits of the movie, right? It is from Little Rock through, well, I actually stopped with Brown. Started with Little Rock and I had that 10-year period, 55 to 65, and got through the Civil Rights Act with the beginning of the Voting Rights Act. And that's the hook. If you want to know how the Voting Rights Act goes, you got to come back after lunch. The third session was titled The Movement Continues. And the movement continues basically expose the teachers to the idea that there is de jure segregation and there's de facto. And de facto is the movement continues. And I was going to ground the post-65 movement, post-68 movement, the 1970s movement in my research on Pensacola, Florida. We received notification 3 days. It was January 22nd was when we were supposed to have this teacher training seminar. It was to prepare students for Black History Month. It was to prepare them for a road trip they were taking to Alabama. And we received word that the Osceola County, Florida School District, based on the title alone, they said in their correspondences, determined that in light of the conversations we're having at the state level regarding critical race theory, we are indefinitely postponing this program. Now, I don't need to go into CRT, what it is, what it isn't. I don't need to talk about the legislation per se. We've talked about a lot of that, right? You've got the context to understand that that's not what this is. They did not have my PowerPoints. No one talked to me about what this seminar is about. CRT does not stand for Civil Rights Training. But evidently in some parts of Florida it does. The teachers were told initially, COVID. They were lied to. Because I had some who reached out to me. And oh, by the way, I guess maybe the story of how this goes. Yeah, I have to back up a little, Kacie. You're right. I decided that this was so egregious that I needed to air that grievance, right? To say, this is what's happening as a result of this legislation in Florida. Teachers are scared. What do I do with this? NCHE is in a precarious situation as well. My career had prepared me to take this public, period. Just like the classes I teach, I stand on the foundation of historical evidence. The evidence spoke for itself. And in the modern vernacular, the way you get a message out is Twitter. I hear I'm a hoot of a follow. But anyway. So in a 10-step factual, I was very, very careful with the words and language that I used. Why? Because we have to be when we represent a profession. When you represent an institution, we are all replaceable. I'm very careful with the way that I walked through, spelled this out, and explained what happened, and said this is the intended consequence of the legislation that's coming from Tallahassee. When I left work that day, I looked, and a few former students mostly. Yeah, Dr. Butler, yeah, way to go. Thanks. Whew. It blew up. And it was totally unexpected. I just wanted to draw attention to what I thought was a grave injustice, right? Everything I've done prepared me for this, because then NBC News, CNN, NPR, Dan Lebatard's show, career highlight, I must say, all wanted to talk to me about how history, Black history in particular, has now been canceled. Cancel culture. Huh. Well, I remember having the conversation with a Mark Puto, actually, at NBC News, and asked, geez, this story's really gained traction, Mark. And he's like, yeah, we recognize, for those of us who follow these things, your story, and I quote, is the first of many more to come.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely on target. The true indoctrination was what was already in place to prevent this history from being taught. Now, I will back up a minute, and I will say that I tend to give a little bit of grace to the school boards in Florida, because there is a precedent. There was a precedent then for the state withholding funds from districts that imposed masks in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah.
There was the very real fear that if this dude is talking about African-American history and Black history with that accent, the wrong person's going to complain and we're going to have our funding revoked. That's how the state of Florida gets down. What I didn't know, and I did my research because historian, as we went through these processes and the bills and the laws and who's making these decisions, right? You go to the legislation and they're claiming all of these nefarious things with CRT are happening. Who are they footnoting? Christopher Rufo.
Yeah.
It is a dog chasing its tail with the same group of people who are intentionally, they're saying the quiet part out loud, as was pointed out yesterday, indoctrinating students. They're using each other in an echo chamber as validation for their war on historical truth. What I also learned is that political appointments were being made at the state level. And this is fact, you can Google it. This isn't political, it's factual. People are being appointed to positions based on their political ideologies and their allegiances, not their expertise. Hence my expertise question this morning, right? They are determining policy. Those policies are being recommended to the state legislature. The legislature's passing it, and then there is a culture, a climate of anticipation that's really being awaited. That when there is a spark, Osceola County, the long civil rights movement, then you can say cancellation. People yesterday mentioned, and I believe it was our friend from Louisiana, that you can write your legislature, you can petition the state senate. Yeah, that's great. In Florida, it was already law. It's a done deal. That's how it works. Indoctrination, sometimes by omission. I have a sociologist friend at Flagler, Leonard Stevenson, who's working on this concept of indoctrination by omission. What we don't talk about sometimes is just as important as what we do talk about, right? And this idea of there's going to be more to come. I have a couple of quick examples before I wrap up for questions. When it comes to things to come, number one, it didn't stop with me, right? And it was not a story of a professor versus a governor. That was not the story. The story was the war on historical truth and who benefits and who doesn't. That's the story, right? What's to come? So a couple of things that you may have heard of that have happened since that are a continuation of this. Maybe you haven't heard about it. One, you may have heard about the 54 textbooks, math textbooks, that were flagged by the state for containing CRT. Look closer. Yeah. It's borderline satire. Look closer though. The emphasis was on CRT. However, those books were flagged because state standards had changed and there were some questionable things with state standards, and it was thrown in social and emotional learning in CRT. The Miami Herald did an investigation, hence the importance of journalism, Rick, right? I'm preaching to the choir, right? The Miami Herald found that of the 54 books flagged, only four were flagged for potentially including CRT. Again, historical methods. I try to show students what it is to be a scholar who is on the board that flags these books. 3 people. One was someone who had no educational background, however, was a member of the Indian River Moms for Liberty organization. The other 2 were students at Hillsdale College, including a sophomore member of the College Republicans. Now that's all fine and dandy. You have the ability to join any groups you want. But what gives you the expertise to flag textbooks at the state level in another state for potentially violating CRT? That's the bait and switch, guys. You got to keep your eye on the ball. This is fabrication. It's not, this is, this is the satanic panic with much more dire consequences for those of us who understand what the slogan Black Lives Matter really means. David threw out the challenge, I think, of finding the bright side. Here's the bright side. Here's the bright side. Censorship has opened doors. Never let a crisis go to waste. Censorship has opened doors. We didn't get to speak in Osceola County, but we got an invite to speak to you. I didn't get a chance to give my presentation to 20 plus teachers. I did get the invitation to give that same presentation, though, to hundreds of teachers through the Michigan Social Studies Council. Hey, look, and that's the other thing. I want everybody to understand, I'm not a martyr. I am in a position where I can be the voice of the voiceless. Literally, according to what one great philosopher once said. The people that I study are the martyrs. I owe it to them. I owe it to people like Harry T. Moore, who was the first NAACP officer assassinated for the crime of filing a suit to equalize teacher pay in the state of Florida. Right? Those are the heroes. And that's why our stories are so important. That's why the freedom to teach these hard truths is important. It's not about me. It's not about everything that this has been turned into. It's about the people who gave their lives for the ability to teach, vote, and hold the same constitutional rights that I have. Those stories are vital because, like it or not, that's who we are as America. History holds up the mirror for us to look into and asks us, are we who we think we are? Some people want to smash the mirror. I don't. So it has opened opportunities that I would not have had otherwise. And I'm very grateful for that. But I think most importantly, and this is not a cliche, meeting people like you who are in the trenches, our students wonder, what is the fuss? Dr. Butler, when are you teaching civil rights again? Dr. Butler, what's the big deal? There is now a generation, and I think this is what scares those in positions of power. There is a generation who have an intellectual curiosity, who have a desire to know, who is Harry T. Moore? Wait, this Emmett Till movie that's coming out, what's it about? Is that true? There is, for those of us who are in the field and teach these hard historical truths, we are recognizing a passion, an interest, and interest turns into action. But again, I'm not going to candy coat the reality. I began by saying we're storytellers as historians. I'm going to conclude with a story. Last week, my neighbor, who is a public school teacher, was telling me that, you know, it's a shame at my high school that when we would walk into the common area, we would have to pass the library. And at the library, there was a outward facing bookshelf that had all of the new arrivals in it. Well, now in Florida, this is law. Any new library purchases have to go through a media specialist for approval. And in some counties, the media specialist was a casualty of underfunding. There is a position in many schools that don't exist that is necessary to trigger new book purchases. Guys, I'm not joking. Book fairs are being canceled. Dictionary donations have been flagged. Dictionaries. Donated dictionaries have been flagged. Okay, so the teacher told me, it's so sad. Because when I walk into our media center now and see those bookshelves, they're outfacing, they're all empty. The Babel plots in Berlin, the Babel plots, has an exhibit. I've been fortunate enough to take students there. It's called the Empty Library. And it is the site that commemorates the most significant university Nazi-endorsed book burnings. And the Empty Library is a plexiglass window into a collection of bright white empty bookshelves. We teach about the past because totalitarian regimes rewrite history to justify atrocities. History matters. Your work matters. Our collective work matters. Thank you so much for your time.
like we should be passing the hat after road. More. But please, questions, comments for Kacie and
Yes, ma'am.
Wondering, I'm in a state that I do have a lot more freedom than you do. And I'm wondering, in hindsight, were there signs before this law was passed that things could go to this extreme that we could look for in our own states as signals that we need to act before things get out of control?
That's a great question.
It is.
And as much as I, again, I hate to say this, I've learned a lot from you guys about organizations and websites and places you can go for help, right? Your question is pertinent because in the Florida civil rights class, the senior level class that I teach, I use a quote from one of my favorite documentarians, Billy Corbin, and his quote is, "The Florida of today is the America of tomorrow." And your question about what can we look out for is pertinent because there's a blueprint being developed for implementation at the national level. Kacie, I think it's hard work, but guess what? We're at the point where it's going to take work, it's going to take effort, paying attention to the bills that your legislators are considering because it's being embedded within, right? I know there are watchdog agencies that are monitoring these things. Find them, follow them, because in Florida, that's my fear, is that when the culture battle hits, it's too late, it's already done.
Right.
You have to be on the front end of that, not the reactionary. And how do you do that? That's what I'm learning from you guys. Kacie, I'll let you.
Sure, yeah, sir.
Yeah, you teach the long civil rights movement. Is this a part of the long civil rights movement? And what lessons does the long civil rights movement have to tell us about how to organize against this sort of thing?
That's an awesome question. I've got 2 points. Is it part of the long civil rights movement? Yes. However, I'm working on a project right now that I have tentatively titled The Long Lost Cause, because it is tied to, and that's one of the things that I've done as well. I volunteered to be on my city's Confederate Monument Contextualization Committee, and the fervor around that was just transferred to curriculum. Okay. It is part of the long civil rights movement. It is part of the long lost cause. It's not just a Southern phenomenon because it's happening elsewhere. How can we take our conversations last night? How can we take lessons from what we study and apply it to today? And I think you nailed it. Student activism is going to be key. I'm thinking February 1st, 1960, it started a revolution. It's going to take students to make this work, to make the demands. How do we do that as teachers in Florida? It's dangerous.
It is. And if I can just piggyback on that. So something I didn't say in the anecdote, but along with the book fairs and the classroom library screenings, we really aren't, I was talking to Haley a bit last night, really, I want to say prohibited, but very closely, nearly, like Time for Kids, Scholastic News. Those are controversial. And so I was requested not to continue my purchase order for those because my site supervisor would have to screen every edition and they come out weekly, right? Or not 2 to 3, and she says, Kacie, it's too much. I love you. I trust you, but I have to be the be all end all of something that you use. And so of course, I have not renewed my subscription, but with that said, many of those articles would have what you're talking about. They're seeing themselves right in the news, and it's a grassroots effort. And something that was brought up in the panel this morning about teaching, or we used to do mock elections. 2016, we weren't allowed to. And so, but we were allowed to every other year prior to my teaching career. I think I mocked the Senate race instead. But so like there's these we know what we want to do, but there's still these severe limitations in the classroom. And it would honestly almost have to happen outside the public school classroom on some level, just because we really can't have them see themselves in true time. As a matter of fact, I'm from Sarasota County, and you may have seen us in the news a bit on the national level. We tend to have some very heated school board meetings that make it to some national news outlets. And I've been very, we call ourselves the closet teachers at some level, because that's kind of how we feel. It's dangerous on some level, but I've been somewhat moot about, some things, but I wanted to get to you, Haley, too. I kind of lost my train of thought, but we know what we want to say, but we're really struggling to find the outlet and who to trust, honestly, because we are so quick to be a social media post could literally be career ending, and we have families, and we know. So you know what I'm trying to say, but nonetheless.
And to follow up on that, I will say, you guys are the exception in that you are actively seeking engagement on how to do this. Most teachers that I've talked to say, Dr. Butler, I just want to go home. I want to pay my bills. I want to live. I'm counting on this, and I want to, but I'm a single mother. My husband lost his job during COVID. So I'm very empathetic to those concerns. And as I was talking to Kevin before this, when you are the voice of the voiceless, when you're the front facing person, not everybody's cut out for it. Not everybody should be doing it, because there are landmines out there that you don't know exist until you step on them. So, yeah.
Jump in.
I just wanted to add another point of evidence to support what Kacie was talking about with, teaching civics in classrooms. There are new civic standards that are going to be rolled out, I think, starting the 23-24 school year. And they're offering teachers like $3,000 to attend trainings to learn these new civic standards. But I was looking into them yesterday. They're buying our
Input
support. But essentially, I was looking at the standards yesterday during one of the panels, and one of the things that struck me was the panelists were talking about doing things like mock elections and the source breakdowns. And there was a standard in our civics curriculum for seniors that specifically suggested doing a mock election, whether it be like a legislative election or holding mock congresses. Those standards have been completely erased, and instead they're standards that require students to trace political philosophy from ancient Greece to the modern day.
If I can step in real fast, just to give you some ideas about that. I had a reporter share with me the slides that the State Board of Education was using. They used quotes from Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, critical of the slave trade, without ever mentioning they were slave owners. They used Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech to praise the mechanism in our Constitution for abolition.
They love doing that.
It's and I should
Leadership Institute.
Yeah. And for teachers that did attend that training, I was actually out of town. They wanted me, of course, to be the face of our county, but nonetheless, they were parents. There were rallies outside the actual PD developments. So teachers were kind of like escorted into these trainings, and they kept the doors, I'm not joking, locked. And there was a vested interest from the community what was happening inside those rooms. And I'm speaking of which, so I did meet some of the Osceola County teachers in person. I was asked to be educational advisor at NASA this summer, and they could not wait to talk to me. And here I am thinking I'm talking to them about the pedagogy we're going to do with the Cold War, and they're like, "Oh, so you're that? What really happened?" And I was like, "Oh boy, here we go." So what Mike shared was that he did take our story public. I did not, for obvious reasons. And so he was very good about protecting my identity, et cetera. And I did counsel my union just, for some advice. And they said, "Why bother? Why would you bring undue attention?" And I thought my silence was, I was complicit in it. And then again, that's what I'm fighting against, right? But so they came to me and they asked, and we kind of shared the backstory that they were indeed lied to, and it's almost unfathomable. I mean, it seems like we're so regressive in this case, but it was refreshing at least to know that they they were not duped, right? And so they felt this, so they were being activists on their level too. But I just, yes, I didn't need to.
Well, I just want to make a quick comment. Somebody asked a question about patterns, and in Florida particularly, like you can trace all this to Hillsdale, to the National Association of Scholars. So if you start digging up that curriculum, looking at who's involved, like you will see those people in Florida, and you'll see patterns in the standards. All of that is connected. So I think that's one way to, push back, to be aware of what they're saying, and they put out their playbook. Like use the playbook against them. Hillsdale and National Association of Scholars, the American Birth Rate model standards that have just been put out by them. So being aware of those things, I think, are really important.
That's a great point.
I just want to go really quick comment because I feel like that's the record in this conference. Chris Rufo has called for the repeal of the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Yeah. Well, it had to come next. They gutted the 65 Voting Rights Act. Why stop there? Has there been any pushback from parents at all? Are parents engaged with this at all? And secondly, does the word academic, has the term academic freedom simply vanished? Does it mean anything anymore?
I'll let you handle the parents and I can do the
Sure.
academic.
So yes, my district again makes some national highlights, to say it kindly. One of the co-founders of Moms for Liberty actually is a school board member. And ironically, her daughter used to go to school with my daughter and as babies. So it's kind of weird that I've known her for a long time in a different capacity as a room mom. And then we turned into this, political sphere. But nonetheless, so yes, it really started with the mask mandates more than anything. And I was talking to Haley last night. I really feel we had a concurrent teach in Sarasota County for at least a year. And so I feel like there was a lot of windows into the classroom that may have fueled some of the fire. That's just my personal belief. And so, yes, I started to see a trend that parents had more ammunition and it was misinterpreted but used against teachers. And when we asked to use Zoom last year for excessive absences because we had so many quarantine cases in our classrooms and we were so concerned about this loss of learning, the district said absolutely not. We're not putting cameras back in your classroom.
The question of academic freedom, I think, depends where you are.
Yeah.
And I am lucky to be at an institution where I let my administration know what was going on. I had been there for 13 years. I have a track record of public engagement. They respect that. Except for the fact we brought Dr. Jeffries to campus, that's kind of questionable, but they let that slide. So it is, when I say you're building a track record and you are preparing for a moment in everything that you're doing with engagement, it builds credibility. In my administration, we've got a new president who we explained this to him. I explained it to my academic deans. We brought the president in and he was proactive and sent the board of trustees an email saying, this is about to hit the news. And what Dr. Butler was doing was not what is being reported. He was teaching what you say is important for a liberal arts education. Citizenship with integrity is one of our institutional mottos. So I think, Dr. Blight, where you are determines the amount of academic freedom that you have. And I'm also cognizant that institutions will replace you if you become too inconvenient for them. So there's a dance there that you're constantly having. And I get to do the academic freedom thing where some of my Black and brown colleagues can't.
Sheila, you wanted to jump back in.
I can't remember who it was that asked about what you should look for if you're not. Okay, so the group that is taking this from Florida and pushing it and taking it to other states is the Civics Alliance. Conservative coalition of policymakers and academics. Look out for them.
Let's take a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Kind of more a couple of comments. I'm thankful now, Connecticut, where we do have much more academic freedom. I used to teach in North Louisiana, so like the Buffalo of the Bible Belt, so I definitely know what y'all are talking about. But I think we're using the word like parent, and I think we really need to identify, it's really like what kind of white parent engagement is there at those school board meetings, so it's not parents of color who are complaining about being taught the truth, it's the white parents from the mom. But then also I think that you asked the question at the beginning, where do the academics go? I think it's important to note that most people are not gonna get any kind of history education once they leave high school, period. Doesn't matter if they go to college, they're just not gonna study it, you know, so I think
Fair
that
assumption.
that's what we have to really focus on, is getting to the kids before they're 18 years old, because after that, unless they study history, I think that's where we focus on, is the people.
50% of Americans go to some kind of higher ed.
Yeah.
But I do think that those of us who know better should do better. And if we have the opportunity to volunteer and go into these public spaces and condense hard histories into terms that they can understand and process, it's a win-win. I think we need both, right? So. you've been very-
Let's take a couple more here. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that there's an important thing that we can do, we can advocate, you know,
Yeah.
I'm a literature teacher. I teach history and literature like it's the one and the same. And everyone has to take my class to graduate from the college, right? And so if they're not taking
Yeah.
history classes or, you know, whatever, I think there's lots we can do cross-curricular things to ensure that people are learning that.
And I just wanted to, if I could, just say something about the parent involvement question, because you heard my story from New Hampshire. And I just wanted to say, because I had to be acutely aware of like where parents were at with everything and really kind of watch that closely. In New Hampshire, there was huge movements of parents, you know, speaking out, you know, against censorship and against getting to that point that, you know, we are at now and not quite where you are. But they were very, very active. Students and parent groups were very active. And then when it came to the sweeping school board elections, the majority of people who were sort of anti-public school or, you know, leaning toward those kind of restrictive laws most of them lost. So it was a really positive sort of wave. And I know Jennifer talked about it a little bit this morning, but I just wanted to throw that in there too, that we did have some great parent movement.
Great, yeah.
I want to say thank you both for sharing this, and today's really giving me an appreciation for kind of the position I'm in as a teacher in Massachusetts, in the bluest of the blue, right, where none of this happens anywhere near my classroom. But at the beginning, you asked us to think about, like, as people who are teaching in these non-contested spaces, what can we do? And I'd love to get your just any thinking that you have about what you think a person in a position like mine could do to help people in positions like yours.
I think Dr. McLean had a great answer for
Yeah.
that. The websites, the organizations, unionization, all of this matters. You've got to organize, you have to communicate, you have to network with people so that you can be informed of what's going on. And then you can ask, there's this issue, what can I do? You know, one of the great things about this conference has been, I had the same question and was confronted with it last night. And it's, wow, I'm learning a lot today, right? On how people who are teaching these hard histories in states where they aren't as challenged can help those who can. And, you know, one of the things, all politics are local. School board elections. Who is more qualified to hold a school board position than somebody who is in the field? Not your used car salesman. Nothing against them. I'm sure that they can. We need educators, right? So, yeah, it's a cop-out answer. And it's a complicated answer, but you need to find the organizations that places like Yoder Lerman are putting together to bring you guys together and roadmap solutions and outcomes to help sort of relieve some of those of us who are in places where it is contested.
Beth, go ahead, and then we'll take one or two more. 2 o'clock starts the next session. Go ahead.
Real quickly, so I just wanted to say, I had a little experience, not like this, and I'm very well protected, but even at Yale University, you can run into these situations, so I'm happy to tell that story to anyone who would like to know. But I used to run a program here in grand strategy, and that started out as a foreign policy program. I was expanding it into domestic politics, and to some degree into these questions of social change and sort of how do people actually make the change, conduct the battles on all sides in many perspectives throughout our history. And I guess I would just say, these are big battles, right? And there are lots of ways. So nobody's going to be doing all of these things. There are media strategies, there are legal strategies, there are political strategies, there are intellectual strategies, there are curricular strategies, right? There are grassroots strategies, there are top-down strategies, there are alliance strategies. And so I would just encourage everyone in the room to just think about to think about all the tools that are available, test cases, electoral work, fighting in your own school district, whatever it may be that's available to you. There's a big toolbox out there. People often think very narrowly about these questions, but think about what your toolbox is and where you can kind of fit into what's going to be a really big picture set of struggles, especially if Ron DeSantis becomes president. But there's lots of room to think about this.
One last question. Go ahead.
What I wanted to just say was just to encourage everybody. It's important to tell these stories, not only for what they did and what they were able to accomplish, but without going back and actually figuring out how they did it, right?
That's right.
That's the reason why our opponents keep winning. They have the same playbook and they keep running it until we figure something else out, right? They look at history and they figure out how they got over the first time and they keep running it over and over and over. We celebrate the accomplishment without actually embracing the strategy. So like, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
We can't get this without being uncomfortable. So celebrating, the fact that somebody was martyred is different than saying one of us might have to be martyred.
The left has never lost an opportunity to lose an opportunity. So this idea of what are we doing? How do we convey the importance of history to people? Well, maybe that boat has sailed, but maybe what they think is history is not history, it's nostalgia. There's a difference.
Did the Democratic Party hire you for soundbite?
Well, that's part of it, Dr. Blight. It is, when I speak to community groups, I have to find ways to connect,
Yes, you do.
right? And it's like I'm talking to people who are interested in history, but they're not interested in historiography of the lost cause. We can talk about that, but I need to stress to them why history matters to you. So
now, before we thank these two amazing people, let me just say too, pick up on your idea. I mean, I feel a certain anger out of these 2 days and despair. I mean, I'm pissed off. I've learned so much. I'm inspired. But this issue, like the gun issue, like climate, like name your 5 top issues that have us polarized. This needs a mass movement. Now, that was absolutely right. There's 10 different things we can do, from where we sit, where we stand, who we connect to, what we actually do. But this needs a mass movement. This needs a national mass movement. And I'm not sure how that can, I mean, there's so many other issues in the way, in some ways. There's so many things in the way of this idea that we are back in the 50s here. You guys are under a certain kind of thought tyranny. Your practice is under a certain kind of legal tyranny. I mean, all I can, Kacie, everything you say, and Haley, I can remember back, my principal of the school I taught at was an old Marine. He didn't give a damn what I taught in my room if I kept my hallway from having any violence. If nothing happened in my hallway, you do whatever you want in your classroom. Every time I closed my door, it was my classroom. And I did what the hell I wanted. You live in this social media environment, you live in an entirely different environment. I even rigged up the speaker in my room to shut off the announcements, because I got so sick of them. Actually, I had the assistant principal's son do it. He knew how. Anyway, but it's reminding me how free I was as a high school teacher to just, and I taught some stupid things too. I screwed up the curriculum half the time, but I was experimenting.
right.
I was free, and you're not. This is a freedom movement. And it needs a mass movement for her
Can I
rights.
find people that a group of high school students in Parkland, Florida,
Yeah.
created a mass movement?
Right?
There's also the Network for Public.
Nancy,
Yes,
sum this up.
so, well, no, I'm not that, but
We're-
I do know that you're the incoming president, the next president of OEH, and there are always these presidential sessions, pop-up
Where's
sessions.
Erica? She and I collaborate.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be in the car with her soon, so I'll get to know you, but there is an ability to convene these
Oh, we've
last
already
minute.
talked about it.
Okay, because this would be fantastic. I mean, I can't think of
Oh.
anybody who would be in the OAH who would not want to hear from the teachers and what you're going through, and also think together about, you know, what we could all do. on
Nancy
this.
just
So-
volunteered for the program committee. And I can already tell you the theme, presidents get to choose the theme, I guess, but it's gonna be the theme in 24, 25.
Perfect.
And I don't, you know.
Perfect.
So plan to come to, and it's in Chicago in January. What should be that?
Already in my list.
Yeah. Sorry, Chicago. All right, the next session. Oh,
Downstairs. Thank you.
I hope that was what you
No, no,
wanted.
the good Reverend, you were fabulous.